TrueStory Vibes warmly welcomes all our beloved listeners. We're so glad to see you again in our familiar time slot.
Today,
TrueStory Vibes brings you a brand new story, one that we hope will touch your heart and stay with you. As you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing the quote or moment that left the deepest impression on you. Wishing you a wonderful and meaningful listening experience. Aurora Finch sat rigidly on the narrow examination table, her heart pounding so violently she feared it would burst free of her chest. The walls around her were a sterile, glare-white expanse, no windows, no pictures, no color to soothe the mind. Above her, a harsh fluorescent light hummed and flickered, turning every corner of the room into an unforgiving stage. She blinked once, twice, as if to dispel the fog of exhaustion clouding her thoughts. Just yesterday, she had been packing for the weekend retreat her husband, Sebastian Crow, had insisted wouldn't interfere with her new marketing job. Now, her suitcase lay abandoned at home in Crescent Harbor, and she had no recollection of how she had ended up here. Footsteps approached, echoing down the corridor outside. Aurora's pulse quickened, but the door swung open to reveal not a doctor, but her mother-in-law, Vivian Darkwood, dressed immaculately in charcoal gray tailored pants and pearls that caught the light with every deliberate movement. Vivian's smile was a study in cold calculation, as though she believed her carefully coiffed hair and designer shoes could somehow conceal the brutal purpose of her visit. "Good morning, dear," Vivian cooed, stepping into the room like a queen surveying her domain. She laid a hand on Aurora's shoulder, and the contact sent a jolt of icy terror through her veins. "I've brought the paperwork for your evaluation. Dr. Grant wants to run a few more tests, just to be certain." Aurora swallowed hard, fighting to keep her voice steady. I'm not insane," she managed. Every syllable felt like chewing glass. "You can't keep me here." Vivian's lips curved into a practiced expression of sympathy. "Oh, sweetheart, we're merely helping you heal. You've been under so much stress lately, Sebastian's long hours, relocating to that big city condo, your promotion," she trailed off, letting the unspoken conclusion hang in the stale air. That Aurora was somehow fragile, unfit for the challenges she had so proudly embraced. Aurora's cheeks burned with humiliation and rage. "You used your influence to have me committed," she accused, her voice rising. "You lied to my friends. You told them I was psychotic." "Yes, I did," Vivian admitted, her tone silky and unrepentant. "But only because you refused to accept that this environment wasn't right for you." She pressed a thin folder into Aurora's trembling hands. "Sign this, and they'll let you go home. Refuse, and we'll have to keep you under observation for a while longer." Aurora's eyes darted to the words on the first page. Diagnosis: acute stress reaction, borderline personality tendencies. Each phrase struck her like a blow. She clenched her jaw. "This is a lie." "As you wish," Vivian said, lifting an eyebrow. "The choice is yours." Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and left behind a room that suddenly felt smaller, more suffocating than before. Silence swallowed Aurora once more. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she stared at the folder, the weight of her mother-in-law's betrayal sinking in. Just hours ago, she had believed Vivian cared for her well-being. Now she saw it clearly. This was a calculated act of control, designed to isolate her, to sever her from anyone who might believe the truth. A soft click sounded at the door, and Dr. Grant slipped inside, clipboard in hand. His eyes were kind, but his stance was firm. "Miss Finch, time to come with me for a blood panel. It'll only take a moment." Aurora looked up, steeled herself, and folded the folder under her arm. She rose slowly, every muscle trembling, but she forced her chin up.
"Fine," she said.
"Let's get this over with." As Dr. Grant guided her into the hallway, Aurora's mind raced. She would not break here. She would question every record, push for every interview, and prove, no matter what it took, that she belonged out there, in her own life. Not locked away in a hall of white walls and fluorescent lights. The door hissed shut behind her, sealing away the safety of familiar reality. But in that moment of cold, clinical uncertainty. A spark of defiance ignited in her chest. Aurora Finch would reclaim her story, one way or another. Aurora stumbled through the front door of the Crow family's Crescent Harbor estate, her suitcases trailing behind her on the polished marble floor. The opulent foyer, crystal chandelier, hand-carved mahogany banister, felt surreal, as though she'd stepped into someone else's life. She barely registered the cool sea breeze drifting through the open balcony doors or the distant roar of waves crashing on the rocky shore below. Sebastian Crow stood by the grand piano in the corner, his tailored navy suit impeccable despite the late hour. He raised an eyebrow when he saw her. "You're home early," he said, voice calm but distant, as if he'd been rehearsing these words for weeks. Aurora bristled, memory of the fluorescent room still sharp in her mind. "There was nowhere else for me to go," she replied, dropping her bags. "And I refused to sign that damned evaluation." Sebastian glanced at the thick folder clutched in her hand, Vivian's handiwork, and sighed. "Mom went too far. She always does." Aurora shot back. "But this time, I'll fight." She squared her shoulders. "Where have you been for the past year, Sebastian?" "While I was chasing my career goals. You were off gallivanting in Manhattan clubs." He paused, lifting his hands defensively. "You were in Boston 3 days a week on marketing pitches. I had to blow off steam." Aurora's laugh was bitter. "Blow off steam? With whom?" "Because I know it wasn't just your college buddies." Sebastian's eyes flicked away. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I never meant to hurt you." Her heart clenched. She believed his apologies before, after every late-night argument, every broken promise. But this time felt different. Vivian's cold ambition had exposed a rot at the foundation of their marriage, a man who saw his wife not as a partner, but as another convenient chapter in his privileged life. Aurora crossed to the grand window overlooking the harbor, the moonlight turning the water to liquid silver. "I used to love this place," she whispered. "Our honeymoon, the moonlit strolls, the promise of forever." Sebastian joined her, carefully brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I still love you," he said. She turned, eyes blazing. "If you loved me, you'd have protected me from her. You'd have come with me to Greystone when I called. Instead, you handed me over to her." His jaw tightened. "I was between you and my mother." Don't." Aurora cut him off. "Don't you dare deflect this onto her. You made your choice." Silence stretched between them, charged with years of unmet expectations. Finally, Sebastian looked away. "What do you want me to do?" Aurora's gaze softened just a fraction. "I want you to choose me," she said quietly. "Not her. Not your business trips.
Me."
He swallowed. "And if I can't?" Her heart sank, but she steeled herself. "Then don't stand in my way." Sebastian's shoulders slumped, the elegant facade slipping for a moment to reveal regret, or perhaps relief. He nodded once. "I understand." As Aurora carried her bags toward the guest wing, she felt a bittersweet pang. Crescent Harbor would always hold their happiest memories, and now their undoing. She refused to be another trophy in Sebastian's life. Drawing on the defiance that had fueled her escape from Greystone, she resolved to rebuild on her own terms, whatever the cost. Outside, the tide lapped softly at the shoreline, a steady reminder that even the strongest storm eventually gives way to calm. And Aurora Finch, bruised but unbowed, would chart her own course through the darkness ahead. Aurora Finch found a rare moment of solace in the early morning light filtering through the lace curtains of her guest suite. After her confrontation with Sebastian, she intended to pour herself another cup of coffee before tackling the day's challenges. Instead, she discovered a soft knock on her door. "Miss Finch," a familiar, tremulous voice called. It belonged to Harper Reed, the Crow family's 18-year-old live-in assistant. Harper's pale blue eyes were red-rimmed, and her once neat blonde braid lay loose over one shoulder. "Harper." "Come in," Aurora said, setting aside her mug. Harper stepped forward, clutching a crumpled note in her hand. She looked far older than her years, as though some great weight pressed upon her chest. I need your help," Harper whispered, voice quivering. Something terrible happened last night. Aurora rose, concern flooding her. What is it? Harper closed the door gently, then sank onto the edge of a chaise longue. It's Bartholomew, she stammered. Grandpa attacked me. Aurora's heart lurched. Bartholomew Crow was Sebastian's imposing father, silver-haired, domineering, and known for his volatile temper. She knelt beside Harper. Go on. Tell me exactly what happened. Harper took a trembling breath. I was returning his evening tea. He was drunk, and he grabbed me in the hallway. He said if I made a sound, he'd ruin my family. Her voice broke. Aurora's stomach twisted. She gripped Harper's hand. You're safe now. You can tell me. Harper nodded, tears spilling free. He locked the door to the library and forced himself on me. I tried to push him, but he was so strong. She pressed her free hand against her abdomen. I didn't scream. I was too scared. A cold fury ignited within Aurora. Did you tell anyone? Harper shook her head. I went to Vivian. Harper's lower lip quivered. I thought maybe she'd help, but she looked at me like I was a disgrace. She said it was my fault for being there after curfew. Aurora's eyes widened. Vivian blamed you? Harper's tears fell in silent shame. She threatened to kick me out, to destroy my parents' reputation in town if I didn't sign a statement that I'd lied about Grandpa's inappropriate affection. Harper's fingers uncurled the note. She forced me to write it. Let me see. Aurora took the paper. Harper's shaky handwriting claimed she had misunderstood, a gesture of affection. The letter read like a confession of fantasy, not reality. How could she do that? Aurora whispered. Vivian said, Harper continued in a hollow voice, that if I didn't comply, she'd see my family bankrupt. My dad's a mechanic. They couldn't survive the scandal. Aurora rose, anger coiling in her chest. Come with me. They slipped from the guest wing through silent corridors, Aurora's heels clicking as she led Harper to the hidden stairwell behind the library paneling, the secret route orchestrated by Dr. Orion Hale to facilitate her escape. But today, they paused at a locked side door. Aurora produced a key from her pocket, Xavier Locke's master set, and opened it. Inside lay a dim service hallway, leading to the boathouse corridor. They hurried outside into the cool dawn air. Harper shivered against the breeze. Aurora wrapped her own shawl around the younger woman. We're going somewhere safe, Aurora promised. They reached the boathouse and descended a flight of creaking wooden steps to the shore. A single fishing boat awaited, its hull weathered but serviceable. Aurora boarded first, then helped Harper down. The salty tang of the bay stung Aurora's nostrils. As the boat's engines sputtered to life, Aurora steered away from the dock. You're not alone, she said, voice soft. Dr. Hale and Xavier will protect you. Harper's chin trembled. I don't know if I can face them. I feel so dirty. Aurora reached out, tilting Harper's chin. You were violated, not defeated. They will believe you. They will help you reclaim your life. Aurora guided the boat toward a small cove beneath a stand of redwoods, Dr. Hale's emergency rendezvous point. By the time the shoreline buffeted the hull, Harper's tears had slowed. The world felt too bright, too real, yet it was the first dawn of her true awakening. At the cove's dock, Dr. Orion Hale waited, quietly closing his medical bag as they approached. His expression was grave, yet reassuring. Behind him stood Xavier Locke, the defense attorney, reading from a legal pad. Ms. Reed, Miss Finch. Orion greeted. We've arranged a safe house, medical care, and legal measures. You've done the hardest thing already by telling the truth. Harper swallowed, raising her shoulders as if summoned by courage. I want him held accountable. Xavier nodded. We'll file charges for sexual assault and coercion. And we'll include Vivian Darkwood's intimidation in the complaint. Aurora squeezed Harper's hand. You're the bravest person I know. The boat's motor idled, spray dancing in the dawn light. In that quiet cove, away from the Grand Estate's moral bankruptcy, Aurora and Harper found an unspoken bond, survivors determined to fight. As they disembarked, Aurora glanced back at the distant lights of Crescent Harbor, the gilded towers of privilege now tarnished by crime and corruption. She turned toward her friend, determination in her gaze. "Let's go home," she said. And for the first time since that terrible night, Harper Reed believed she had won again. The sterile whiteness of Greystone Psychiatric had become Aurora Finch's cage. Each corridor and examination room bore the echo of her whispered protests and the relentless hum of fluorescent lights. But deep within the hospital's locked wards lurked one man who refused to accept Vivian Darkwood's lie, Dr. Orion Hale, a 35-year-old psychiatrist assigned to Aurora's treatment. From the moment he reviewed her file, Orion sensed a grave injustice. Aurora's charts were riddled with inconsistencies, episodes of acute stress labeled as personal delusions, her nights of agitation construed as manic outbursts, every emotional plea dismissed as further evidence of her instability. He studied her MRI scans, found nothing to justify an involuntary commitment, and watched her resolutely refuse lithium and antipsychotic medications that subtly numbed her mind. Late one evening, under the pretext of a standard check-in, Orion slipped into Aurora's room. The door clicked shut behind him. Aurora sat on the edge of her bed, eyes red from crying. "You look exhausted," Orion said quietly, drawing up a chair. His voice was calm, measured, a stark contrast to the sterile cruelty of the institution. She offered a brittle smile. "It's hard to tell if it's the insomnia or my heart breaking." Orion opened a small notebook, one that Vivian would never find. "I believe you, Aurora. I've reviewed every document. The diagnosis is wrong." Aurora's eyes sharpened. "You're risking everything by saying that." He nodded. "That's why we need a plan." Over the next 3 nights after curfew, Orion returned with a dossier of photographs, blueprints, and strategies, his clandestine lifeline. Under the pale glow of the nightlight, they pored over every detail. The psychological loophole. Greystone's policy. Any patient deemed stable by a staff psychiatrist could petition for weekend unsupervised passes, provided they completed 6 consecutive compliant therapy sessions. Orion would mark Aurora's charts as compliant, cooperative, progress noted, no resistance. In reality, he would administer a placebo in her morning med cart, a harmless vitamin, and record the event as oral anxiolytic accepted. The staff rotation. Hospital security uploaded weekly schedules. Orion quickly memorized the guard rotations on the East Wing where Aurora was housed. Every Tuesday at 2 a.m., Guard Thompson, new, inexperienced, relieved Captain Reed, who was notoriously thorough. A small window of lowered vigilance, 2 minutes between shift sign-offs and logbook entries. The hidden passage. In Aurora's 3rd week, during a hallway integration exercise, Orion deliberately rerouted her through the old linen chute corridor, an emergency access route disused since the 1990s. The chute's door at the top of the service stairwell was unlocked by staff orders once a day for linen transfer. Orion had convinced the night supervisor of a one-off valve repair to leave the chute door ajar for a brief 2-hour window. The disguise. Draped in a volunteer attendant's uniform, navy polo, and khaki slacks, Aurora could slip past the main nurse's station undetected. Orion provided the badge. A laminated card with a holographic seal, courtesy of his medical school alumni connections in the hospital administration. The extraction vehicle. Outside the hospital's rear gate was a parking zone rarely used after 11 p.m. Orion had arranged for a nondescript white minivan, dubbed Unit 47, driven by his friend and former EMT colleague, Marisol Vega. Marisol knew the perimeter codes and would be waiting with engine running, headlights off, every Wednesday at precisely 2:03 a.m. On the 4th Tuesday after Aurora's admission, they set the plan in motion. Orion entered her room at 1:50 a.m. with the placid smile of a man about to change a life. "Ready for your session?" he asked. Aurora nodded, her breathing measured but tense. He handed her the volunteer polo and badge. "Change quickly. I'll meet you in the hallway." Aurora slipped out of her hospital gown and into the uniform. The cool fabric settled around her, an invisible armor. Orion guided her to the door. Remember, head to the service stairwell, take it to the chute door and climb down. I'll be at the bottom. She swallowed. What if I can't? Orion knelt, meeting her eyes. You already have. Trust yourself. At 1:56 a.m., Aurora stepped into the dimly lit corridor. The walls here were pocked with chipped paint and the faint smell of disinfectant. Her shoes made minimal noise. Orion had swapped her squeaky hospital slippers for black slip-ons. She turned left, bypassing the nurse's station. A lone security camera in the corner tracked her path. But its live feed looped on a time delay, a gift from a sympathetic IT technician Orion had quietly convinced days earlier. At 2 a.m., Captain Reed's name disappeared from the security log and Guard Thompson's blinked on. Thompson was fumbling with his radio when Aurora slipped past. She pressed her back to the wall, watched him shuffle around the corner, then exhaled silently. 2 flights up, the service stairwell door swung open, just as Orion had promised. He emerged from the shadows in a Navy volunteer polo of his own. Quick, he whispered. Inside. They eased through the door into the narrow chute room. A single bare bulb swung overhead, casting looping shadows. The chute door at floor level stood unlocked. Aurora hesitated, then climbed into the metal chute, gripping the cold rails as she descended 3 stories in the echoing darkness. At the bottom, Orion steadied her. You're doing great. He led her through an unmarked door onto an alley where the van idled. Marisol Vega sat calmly behind the wheel. Orion opened the passenger door. Marisol, thank you, he said as Aurora climbed in. Marisol smiled. Anytime. She slipped the van into gear and eased out behind rows of parked cars, heading for Redwood City. Inside the van, Aurora pressed her forehead against the glass, watching the hospital's facade fade into the distance. Sweat beaded on her brow, but her heart thudded with raw exhilaration. Orion sat beside her. Safe house in 20 minutes, he said softly. Xavier will meet us there. Aurora's voice trembled. I never imagined I'd actually make it out. He placed a hand over hers. You did. And now you get to write the next chapter. Under the cloak of pre-dawn shadows, the van merged onto the freeway, carrying Aurora Finch away from the prison of Greystone Psychiatric and toward a reckoning that would expose secrets far darker than any whitewashed walls could hide. The morning after Aurora's daring escape, she and Dr. Orion Hale arrived at Maplewood Cafe in Redwood City, a cozy, ivy-draped bistro owned by Matilda Stone, a woman of quiet strength and unwavering kindness. Matilda, a 60-year-old widow with silver-streaked hair tucked into a neat bun, had taken Aurora in without question, offering her a backroom suite and a job helping with pastries. That same evening, as twilight painted the sky in bruised purples, a growling engine pulled up outside the cafe. 2 hulking figures stepped out. Tito Knuckles Reyes, a local enforcer for the Crow family's dirtier operations, and his right-hand man, smiling Marco Vargas. Matilda was in the kitchen, humming softly as she rolled dough for tomorrow's morning shift. Through the cafe window, Aurora spotted the men approach the front door. Her blood ran cold. She recognized Tito from the night he'd threatened her on the docks. She ducked behind the counter just as the bell above the door jingled, and Matilda stepped into the dining room to greet them. Good evening, gentlemen, Matilda said, voice calm but firm. She wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron. Can I help you? Tito's dark eyes narrowed. We're looking for Aurora Finch, he growled. She's been poking her nose where it don't belong. Matilda's gaze flicked toward the kitchen door, then back to Tito. Miss Finch isn't here. Don't play dumb, Marco said, cracking his knuckles. We know she's hiding out here. Matilda took a step forward. You'll have to leave, now. Tito laughed a low, menacing rumble. I like you, Matilda. But business is business. Move aside. Aurora clutched the doorframe, heart hammering. In the cramped kitchen, she reached for a heavy cast-iron skillet, ready to defend Matilda if necessary. A sudden crash, Tito swung a crowbar through the glass display, shards flying. Matilda hissed, yanking Aurora back as the dining room erupted into chaos. Chairs clattered, tables overturned. Marco advanced on the counter where Aurora had hidden. Matilda drawn herself tall. "You leave this place," she commanded, voice echoing with the authority of every hardship she'd ever endured. Tito raised his crowbar to strike her. In that moment, Matilda lunged forward, grabbing a cleaver from the butcher block. She thrust it between Tito's ribs with such force the blade embedded in his coat. He staggered back, stunned, blood blossoming across his chest. Marco roared and charged Matilda instead. Aurora screamed, launching herself over the counter with the skillet raised. She struck Marco's shoulder, but he shrugged it off, closing in on Matilda. Matilda sidestepped Marco's grab, swung the cleaver again, and this time, the blade found its mark in his thigh. Marco howled, spinning away to cradle his wound. Tito, recovering, swiped the crowbar at Matilda. She raised the cleaver defensively, but the blow caught her shoulder. Matilda stumbled, the cleaver slipping from her grip. Aurora lunged to catch it, but Tito kicked her aside. Matilda collapsed to one knee, crimson spreading across her crisp, white blouse. Her hand fluttered to the wound as Marco retreated in agony. "Go," she rasped to Aurora, eyes blazing with fierce urgency. "Save yourself, go now." Aurora hesitated, tears streaming. Matilda had protected her at every turn, but when Marco lunged back, furious and enraged, Matilda summoned her last strength. She grabbed the skillet, swung it hard into Marco's temple. He crumpled to the floor. Tito raised the crowbar again. Matilda struggled up one last time, pressing a shard of broken display glass into his throat. Tito choked, eyes wide with shock as he collapsed next to Marco. Silence fell. Aurora knelt beside Matilda. "Matilda, no, please." Matilda's breathing was ragged. Blood matted her hair. She managed a tired smile. "Aurora, you have to live. Finish what you started." The cafe door burst open as police floodlights bathed the shattered front in stark light. "Redwood City PD. Everyone stay where you are." Aurora clutched Matilda's hand. The older woman's eyes fluttered closed. Aurora pressed her forehead to Matilda's, whispering a broken promise. Paramedics arrived, but Matilda Stone's body was already growing cold. Aurora watched, hollow-eyed, as Matilda's sacrifice secured her protection, clearing the threat for one more day. In the days that followed, Aurora discovered a folded note in Matilda's apron pocket, written in trembling script. "Dear Aurora, you are braver than you know. The fight is just beginning. Find Dr. Hale. Find Xavier. And never, ever give up. With love, Matilda." Aurora pressed the note to her chest, tears falling freely. Matilda Stone had given her life's blood to buy Aurora's freedom. Now, propelled by guilt and gratitude, Aurora vowed to honor Matilda's sacrifice by seeing the fight through to its very end. Aurora Finch's departure from Redwood City had felt like the end of one nightmare and the beginning of another. Under the alias Evelyn, she passed through the hushed private wing of LAX before boarding the red-eye to Los Angeles. A bleary morning lay ahead on the Cathay Pacific flight bound for Taiwan, and though her documents were impeccable, she double-checked every detail: the hotel reservation under her pseudonym, the breakfast meeting with the Taiwanese consul, the encrypted text code she would send once safely inside the Grand Meridian lobby. When the plane's wheels touched down in Taipei, Aurora's pulse quickened. Through the customs hall, she moved with purpose, avoiding lingering looks and quietly praying none of her captors had anticipated this precise route. Outside, the humid air clung to her, scented with salt from the nearby harbor and the faint promise of something new. She spotted the black sedan waiting, its tinted windows and unmarked grille exactly as Xavier had described. The driver, a polite man introducing himself as Mr. Chen, loaded her suitcase without question. As the car merged into traffic, she let herself exhale. Or so she thought. Halfway to the city center, the sedan slowed suspiciously in a narrow alley. Aurora's hand instinctively slipped into her pocket to text Xavier, but before she could tap the screen, Mr. Chen spoke in clipped English. "Miss Lin, I'm taking you to a different address." He grasped her wrist and yanked her arm. "Open the door." The world tilted. She stumbled onto rough asphalt, hooded hands clamped over her mouth, and was shoved toward a waiting van. Her protests were muffled by the gusting wind and the slamming doors. One of the men, a tall figure in a charcoal suit, whispered, "Quiet," before the engine roared them away from the lights of Taiyuan. Bound and blindfolded, Aurora's heart hammered as the van barreled over bridges and through tunnels. She could sense no landmarks, only the steady drone of tires and the promise of betrayal in every cornered turn. Then the vehicle slowed once more, and she felt wooden slats against her back as she was forced into a crate labeled "Antiques, Fragile." The lid clicked shut above her, plunging her into darkness and sealing her fate. Time lost meaning. Aurora twisted inside the cramped box, pressing her ear to the thin wood, catching the hum of a powerful engine and the distant clink of loading ramps. Eventually, the crate jolted upright. She heard footsteps and saw a sliver of fluorescent light as the wooden top was lifted. A pair of strong hands yanked her to her feet and shoved her down a corridor where dripping pipes and flickering bulbs led to a small, tiled room. In the bright glare, she saw two other women, one clutching her stomach, tears streaking her cheeks, the other rocking back and forth, eyes wide with panic. A man in a black silk suit, badge glinting, Huan Lu, enforcement, herded them toward a door draped in sanguine lanterns. Inside, a plush parlor awaited, red velvet chaise longues, low tables laden with tea sets, the faint strains of erotic music drifting from behind heavy curtains. The madam, decked in sequined crimson, glanced up as Aurora entered. "Welcome, Eva Lin," she purred. Her accent was thick, her smile predatory. "We've been expecting you." Aurora's throat tightened. Fury and fear warred within her as she was handed a silk robe embroidered with a gold phoenix and told to change. The satin slid over her shoulders like a coffin lid. Her badge, 057, clinked softly against her hip. As she stepped into the mirrored antechamber, her mind raced. This was the underworld that preyed on the vulnerable. Young women from the provinces promised jobs overseas, only to find themselves trapped in gilded cages. Aurora steadied her breath. She would not break. She had Matilda's sacrifice and Orion's courage coursing through her veins. Her first nights were the most harrowing, feigning compliance while listening for escape routes, memorizing guard shifts, hiding torn fabric for makeshift ropes. Each client's door sealed behind her became both prison and opportunity to learn faces, voices, routines. She gathered small scraps of information, a guard's nickname here, a service elevator panel numbered there, until a blueprint of her own rescue formed in her mind. Late one afternoon, she managed a careful stash of her hidden phone, smuggled in by a friendly waitress who'd recognized Aurora's desperate eyes, and sent a single coded word to Xavier. Nova. Within hours, a meticulously arranged extraction plan began to take shape halfway across the globe. Aurora would need to feign fatal illness, collapse in the private clinic adjacent to the VIP lounge, a tactic she had rehearsed in her mind a dozen times, then be carried out in a stretcher under the pretense of medical emergency. Orion, Xavier, and a Taiwanese lawyer named Mei Lin would converge at the loading dock, intercepting the smugglers before they could reship her to another destination. The final evening arrived. Aurora dressed in the thin medical gown provided by the madam's complicit doctor, letting a test dose of sedative, carefully prepared by Mei Lin, slow her heartbeat. As she collapsed to the floor, the room erupted in panic. Guards burst in. The stretcher bore her through a labyrinth of sterile hallways. Outdoors, under a low-quarter moon, Aurora's unconscious form was transferred to a white SUV bearing diplomatic plates. Mei Lin and Orion hovered over her, shielding her identity as the vehicle sped toward the airport's private cargo ramp. Xavier waited there, credentials in hand, ready to board her on a repatriation flight disguised as a humanitarian mission. As dawn broke over Taipei's skyline, Aurora Finch, known here only as Eva Lynn, slipped into safety once more. Her journey through human hell had tested every ounce of her strength, but she emerged, bruised but unbroken, fueled by an unquenchable resolve to see Vivian Darkwood and her collaborators brought to justice. And somewhere beyond the gentle lull of the plane's engines, hope whispered that her final destination lay not in flight, but in triumph. Aurora Finch stepped off the private jet onto the tarmac at San Jose's quiet executive terminal just before dawn, the cool California light washing over her like a benediction. Wrapped in a simple gray shawl and flanked by Xavier Locke and Mei Lin, her Taiwanese legal ally, she had crossed the world twice, first as a desperate fugitive, then as a survivor determined to reclaim her life. Her heart pounded, but her face was calm. She knew that the next 12 hours would decide everything. Inside the waiting SUV, Xavier handed her a thick folder. "All the filings are in," he said. "We've unsealed her corporate records, the bank transfers, every shell company tied to Vivian Darkwood and Bartholomew Crow. Our motion to freeze their assets was granted this morning. The DA's office is ready to move." Aurora opened the folder. Spreadsheets detailed millions wired through offshore accounts. Shell corporation names, dates, amounts. "She's cornered," Aurora whispered. "No escape." Orion Hale rode beside her, eyes on the road. "Vivian will fight," he warned. "She still has friends on the hospital board in local politics. But evidence is on our side." At the Hall of Justice in Palo Alto, reporters clustered beyond police barricades, their cameras clicking like a swarm of nervous insects. Aurora fixed her gaze forward as she and her team stepped onto the grand marble steps. She looked every bit the poised professional in her navy suit. No trace of the terrified girl who'd stormed Greystone Psychiatric weeks ago. Inside, the courthouse was already buzzing. Aurora took her place at the prosecution table as the defendants appeared via video link. Vivian, in a sharply tailored charcoal suit and dark glasses, Bartholomew, silver-haired and defiantly silent, and Sebastian Crow, his face a mask of awkward regret. When the clerk called the case, Aurora rose. She signed the 200-page complaint, each page a testament to every crime Vivian had committed: wrongful confinement, elder abuse, witness intimidation, racketeering, and human trafficking. She felt the weight of those pages, the weight of every shattered life, press against her fingertips. 2 weeks later, in a closed deposition room, Aurora faced Vivian directly, eyes locked.
"No verías,"
Xavier began. "Mrs. Darkwood, you arranged for Ms. Finch's involuntary commitment at Greystone despite having no medical justification."
"Why?"
Vivian's practiced composure faltered for the first time. "I was worried," she said coolly. "I thought she was unwell." Aurora's voice was calm but firm. "You falsified psychiatric reports, bribed staff, threatened my friends. You sought to isolate me so that no one could see her crimes." Vivian's lips thinned. "I only wanted to protect my son." "You protected your fortune, not your family," Aurora shot back. "You silenced Harper Reed after she was raped by Bartholomew Crow. You forced her to lie under threat of ruin. You killed Matilda Stone when she tried to save me. And you profited from a trafficking network stretching to Nova Taipei." The room was silent as Vivian's facade cracked. For a long moment she stared at Aurora, then looked away, unable to meet her gaze. By the time the deposition reached the press, the world had turned against Vivian. Headlines screamed betrayal, philanthropist to predator, Redwood's darkest scandal. Political allies distanced themselves, charities severed ties. The hospital board where she held sway froze funding announcements. Aurora watched it all in Xavier's makeshift command center, rows of monitors tracking every tweet, every news segment. She finally allowed herself a small, exhausted smile. When the day of her public testimony arrived, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Aurora's voice carried through the hushed chamber. "I stand before you because one woman refused to be silenced. My mother-in-law weaponized the law to hide her crimes. Matilda Stone died protecting me. Harper Reed's voice was stolen. Until I restored it, In Nova Taipei, I saw women reduced to merchandise. Today, I ask this court to restore our dignity by holding Vivian Darkwood accountable. She narrated each crime in brutal detail, the sealed records, photographs of Matilda's shattered cafe window, Harper's medical reports, the cargo manifests from the trafficking compound. Each exhibit fell into place with unshakable precision. Witnesses followed. Harper herself, composed and brave, recounted her assault and its cover-up. Dr. Hale laid bare the psychiatric fraud. Mei Lin testified to the shipment crates and forced labor. The prosecution's case was a flawlessly assembled mosaic of outrage. Vivian's defense tried to pick apart technicalities, challenging signatures, questioning chain of custody, but every objection was countered with irrefutable proof. Xavier's closing argument was a masterclass in moral clarity. This is not merely a family feud. It is the story of how power corrupts, how innocence is stolen, and how courage can reclaim justice. Jurors whispered among themselves before retiring. Aurora felt her pulse in her throat as the courtroom fell silent. When they filed back in, the forewoman rose. We find the defendant, Vivian Darkwood, guilty on all counts. A collective gasp rose. Vivian's shoulders slumped. Her eyes flitted to Aurora, filled with a brief flicker of something like respect or terror.
Outside.
A roar of camera shutters greeted the verdict. Aurora stood beneath the courthouse's grand columns, Xavier to her right and Orion to her left, the sunlight finally cutting through the morning chill. Reporters clamored for statements, but Aurora held up a hand. In that charged hush, she simply said, "Justice is not vengeance. It is accountability." May today's verdict remind everyone that no one is above the law. In the coming days, Sebastian and Bartholomew faced their own sentencing, each man's empire dismantled, their crimes laid bare. Sebastian's apologies rang hollow against the evidence stack. Bartholomew's defiance faded as the final gavel fell. Aurora spent the next morning at Matilda Stone's gravesite, a single white lily in hand. She whispered a vow. For you, Matilda. For Harper. For every soul trapped by injustice. I will never stop fighting. The wind carried her words across the hillside. Below, Redwood City stretched in early light, a world she had saved in part from darkness. And as she stood among the newly blooming jacarandas, Aurora Finch, once defined by others' lies, embraced her life anew, the architect of her own story. Aurora Finch woke to the sterile beeping of a hospital monitor and the soft hiss of oxygen. Her hand instinctively reached for the four-pole beside her bed. Then she realized with a jolt that her other hand was missing, resting lightly in someone else's. She turned her head and found Dr. Orion Hale sitting by her bedside, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but shining with relief. "Aurora," he whispered, voice catching, "you're awake." His hand closed around hers, warm reassurance after weeks of cold uncertainty. She blinked twice, the fluorescent lights above painting the room in sharp clarity. Memories of the courthouse, the verdict, and the months of terror flashed through her mind. Chrysler sedan confrontations, steel crates in Taipei, Matilda's sacrifice. But beneath them all was a singular truth. A life had formed within her. A life now demanding her strength. "Orion," she croaked, throat parched. He squeezed her hand and stood, signaling a nurse to bring water. Aurora sipped gratefully, then focused. "How is the baby?" Orion's face softened into a radiant smile. "Little Leo is perfect. He was born early, premature, but vigorous. He's in the NICU, under gentle care. They say he's doing exceptionally well for a 34-weeker. Tears sprang to Aurora's eyes, tears of relief, gratitude, and awe. I was so scared," she admitted. "What if I lost him?" Orion placed a finger under her chin, lifting her gaze to meet his. "You both are fighters," he said simply. "Leo heard your heartbeat every day, battling side by side with you." She closed her eyes against the swell of emotion. Only weeks ago, she had been another nameless 057 in that mirrored parlor, her future stolen. Now she lay here, mother and survivor, tethered to this man whose steadiness had been her lifeline. The door eased open and a nurse peeked in. "Miss Finch, it's time you met your son." She offered Aurora a small blanket-wrapped bundle. Orion nodded encouragement. Aurora carefully lifted the swaddled figure into her arms. He was tiny, no bigger than her forearm, but perfect in every detail: a button nose, rosebud lips, eyes lightly fluttering in sleep. His breaths came in soft gulps, the ventilator's gentle hiss a lullaby. Tears fell freely as Aurora gazed down at him. She felt an instant bond, a primordial blend of protectiveness and wonder. "Hello, Leo," she whispered. "Mama's here." Orion hovered at her side, hands at the ready. "You did it," he murmured. "You brought him into the world." She leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion mingling with elation. "I never imagined. I never even dared to hope." Her voice cracked. He brushed a stray hair from her forehead. "You're stronger than you know." Silence settled, a sacred pause in the hospital's constant hustle. Aurora traced Leo's tiny fingers beneath the blanket, marveling that such a fragile life could survive the storm she'd endured. She thought of Matilda protecting her at Maplewood, of Harper's stolen innocence, of the crates in Nova Taipei, and realized Leo was more than her redemption. He was proof that hope could sprout even in the harshest conditions. A soft knock announced Xavier and Mei Lin entering. Xavier's dark eyes brimmed with tears as he approached. "Congratulations, Aurora," he said quietly. "He's beautiful." Aurora managed a tired smile. "Thank you for everything." She relinquished Leo gently to Orion, rising on one elbow to reach for Xavier's hand. Mei Lin stood behind Xavier, shining with pride. "He's a wonder," she said, her accent softening the English words. "Taipei has never seen a baby with such a brave heartbeat." Xavier exchanged a glance with Orion, an unspoken promise that this family, however unconventional, would keep Aurora and Leo safe. After they left, Aurora and Orion were alone again. The afternoon light slanted through partially drawn blinds, painting warm bars across the bed. Aurora touched Orion's cheek. "You stayed," she said, voice trembling. "You never left." His eyes softened. "You needed me." She studied him, felt layers of gratitude, something deeper, swelling beneath her ribs. "I thank you." He bent and brushed his lips to her forehead, then, more boldly, to her mouth. "Monday morning, you'll be discharged," he said between kisses. "Then we'll bring Leo home, to the Bay House if you're ready." Aurora closed the distance between them, her senses igniting at the touch of his lips. After all she had suffered, after all they had fought, this moment felt like pure redemption. "Yes," she whispered. "I want to go home." That night, as Orion sat reading by Leo's incubator, Aurora drifted into a fitful sleep, her dreams a tapestry of past horrors and future joys. She dreamed of Matilda's gentle smile, Harper's grateful hug, and her own triumphant testimony in court. But most of all she dreamed of her son's first laugh, the feel of his fingers curling around hers. When she woke, the sun was climbing higher, and Leo lay peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Aurora brushed a finger along his cheek and realized that every moment of terror had been worth this fragile gift. As the nurse prepared their discharge papers, Orion and Aurora stood side by side, a new family forged in battle and bound by love. He slipped an arm around her shoulder. She rested her hand on his chest, where his heart beat a steady promise. Together, they left the hospital, Aurora carrying a newly cleaned, pink-wrapped Leo in a car seat, Orion cradling his mother's blanket, and stepped into the bright midday light. The world beyond the hospital doors awaited them, a life rebuilt, a future claimed. Aurora Finch, once lost in darkness, was finally going home with her son, Leo, whose first breath had been a song of hope, and the man who had never stopped believing in her. Aurora Finch stood just outside the courtroom's iron doors, feeling the weight of every step she had taken to get here. The marble floors gleamed under the grand chandeliers, and the hush of anticipation wrapped around her like a shroud. She smoothed the lapel of her navy blazer, recalling the woman she had been mere months ago, locked away in Greystone Psychiatric, a pawn in Vivian Darkwood's cruel scheme. Now, she was no longer the frightened victim, but the architect of her own vindication. Xavier Locke and Dr. Orion Hale flanked her, their steady presence a testament to the hard-fought alliance that had brought them to this final confrontation. Inside, Bartholomew Crowe sat slumped at the defendant's table, his silver hair a halo of shame under the courtroom lights. Judge Elena Ramirez's voice rang clear as she pronounced sentence, 20 years for the assault on Harper Reed. A sentence earned by the evidence Aurora and her team had painstakingly assembled: Harper's corrected affidavit, the forensic medical reports, the surveillance footage from the Nova Taipei compound. Aurora's gaze locked on Harper, now standing tall and composed, the wrongs done to her finally acknowledged by the law. When the gavel fell, the courtroom shivered with the weight of long-delayed justice. Afterward, Aurora emerged onto the courthouse steps to a frenzy of cameras and microphones. She lifted a hand for silence, drawing in a steadying breath. Today's verdict is not about vengeance, she told the assembled press. It's about accountability, the promise that no one, no matter how powerful, stands above the law. For Harper Reed, for Matilda Stone, for every woman who has been silenced, justice has prevailed. Flashbulbs popped as reporters strained to capture her words. Meanwhile, halfway around the world, authorities in Taipei had used the manifests and victim testimonies Aurora provided to dismantle the trafficking network, rescuing dozens of women and arresting key operatives. An Interpol agent's message pinged Aurora's phone: Operation Phoenix, complete. Relief and sorrow mingled in her chest as she read it. So much suffering, so many lives shattered. Yet a triumph born of solidarity and truth. A week later, Sebastian Crowe faced his own sentencing. No longer the golden heir of Crescent Harbor, he sat in shackles. Confronted by evidence of his role in orchestrating Aurora's confinement, in laundering funds to support the trafficking ring. Judge Ramirez's sentence, 8 years, left him staring blankly at the polished wood desk, remorse finally seeping through his handsome features. Outside, socialites gasped, cameras whirred. But Aurora remained calm. The sentence was neither cruel nor lenient. It was fitting. Vivian Darkwood's empire crumbled next. Frozen assets bled away lawsuits and fines. Federal judges, citing RICO statutes, sentenced her to life imprisonment, her final act of control undone. Every foundation and hospital board she had manipulated stripped of her name. Aurora watched the headlines. Former philanthropist Darkwood sentenced, and let herself a quiet, painful exhale. In the days that followed, letters arrived from friends and strangers alike, apologies from former colleagues who had doubted her, thanks from women empowered by her courage. Matilda Stone's Cafe, once the site of sanctuary and sacrifice, reopened as the Matilda Stone Courage Center, offering therapy, job training, and housing for survivors of trafficking. Aurora cut the ribbon alongside Harper and Mei Lin, her heart swelling as she saw the space, a living monument to hope and resilience. Back at her Bay house, Aurora sat on the porch with Leo curled in her arms. The Pacific breeze ruffled her hair as Orion joined her, fresh coffee in hand. Leo's chubby fingers gripped a strand of Aurora's shawl. She looked out over the water, its surface sparkling under the afternoon sun, and realized she had reclaimed her life from darkness. "We did it," she said softly, voice thick with both triumph and grief. Orion wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Yes," he agreed, his eyes on the horizon. "You did it." And, in that quiet moment, Aurora Finch understood that real justice was more than a courtroom verdict. It was the freedom to rebuild, to give voice to the voiceless, and to nurture the life she had fought so fiercely to protect. Sunlight filtered through the towering redwoods surrounding Aurora Finch's Bay house, painting the living room floor in shifting ribbons of gold and emerald. The Pacific's distant roar set a steady backdrop, a reminder that life, like the tide, moves forward inexorably. Aurora sat at the reclaimed oak dining table, cradling her son Leo in her lap. He was nearly 9 months old now, rounding into a plump, curious toddler whose bright eyes tracked every flutter of her shawl. Orion Hale entered from the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of chamomile tea. His shoulders were relaxed, his dark hair slightly mussed from sleep, and when he saw Aurora and Leo, a soft smile curved his lips. "Good morning," he said, leaning over the table to set her a mug within reach. "Morning," Aurora replied, tilting Leo's car seat slightly so he could reach one tiny fist toward Orion's mug. Orion laughed and gently ruffled Leo's curls as Aurora sipped the warm tea. The Bay House had been Matilda Stone's refuge before it became Aurora's sanctuary. After the courtroom triumphs and the dismantling of the Crow Empire, Aurora and Orion had poured their savings and a substantial anonymous donation from Xavier Locke's firm into renovating the weathered shingle home. The interior was now a blend of modern comfort and coastal charm, whitewashed walls, nautical accents, and family photographs lining a long hallway. Outside, the wraparound deck offered panoramic views of the cove where Aurora and Matilda had once escaped together in that stolen fishing boat. In the weeks since the final sentencing, Redwood City had embraced Aurora as a local hero and a tireless advocate for survivors. A mural of Matilda Stone and Harper Reed adorned the cafe wall that now bore Matilda's name. Survivors took art classes there. Children splashed in the rebuilt koi pond at the center's entrance. Aurora had agreed to serve on the center's board, ensuring that resources reached women who needed shelter, legal help, and medical care. Orion, meanwhile, volunteered weekly at the capacity-strained psychiatric wing of Greystone, lobbying for reform in involuntary commitment procedures. "Are you going to the ribbon?" Orion began, then paused to watch Leo clap his hands when Aurora wheeled him around in a little toy car. Aurora laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. Orion joined in, and Leo's giggles echoed through the open-plan living room. After breakfast, Aurora zipped Leo into his light jacket and carried him out onto the deck, Orion at her side. The morning air was crisp with salt and pine. Below, the cove's water shimmered, and a pair of pelicans skimmed the surface in search of fish. Aurora settled into a wicker chair, Leroy, the family golden retriever, hopping up beside her. "I've been thinking," she said, stroking Leo's soft cheek, "about opening a children's reading program at the center. Kids like Leo need safe spaces to learn and grow, especially if their mothers are rebuilding their lives after trafficking or abuse." Orion nodded. "That sounds wonderful. You'd be amazing at that." He brushed his hand along Aurora's shoulders. "What about you? How are you feeling?" Aurora paused, looking out over the tranquil bay. The weight of her past had not dissolved overnight, but each day felt steadier. She inhaled deeply. "I feel free." Orion's eyes softened. "You deserve that." They stood together, watching Leo try to balance the toy car on the deck's wooden planks, his wobbles drawing delighted cheers from Aurora. It was a scene she once thought impossible, a mother at peace, a father present, a child laughing in safety. Later that afternoon, Xavier Locke arrived with files and plans for a new legal clinic adjacent to the Courage Center. He had secured pro bono space from the city for a satellite office offering free legal counsel to survivors. Aurora greeted him at the door with a hug, Leo reaching out to pat Xavier's suit jacket. As Xavier set down his briefcase and spread architectural sketches on the coffee table, Aurora outlined her vision, a one-stop resource hub combining therapy rooms, legal offices, and a safe playground for children. "I want every service under one roof," Aurora said, tracing a finger along the floor plan. "No more juggling appointments or worrying about transportation. This has to be a place of hope the moment you walk in."
Xavier Smilat.
"I'll get the city on board this week." They were impressed by the center's impact. He closed the folder. "It looks like we're building more than a clinic. We're building a community." When Xavier left that evening, Aurora and Orion settled Leo into his crib upstairs, reading him a bedtime story they both had co-authored. Orion kissed Aurora's forehead as she tucked the final page in place. "You two make a great team," Orion whispered. Aurora let out a tired laugh. Not bad for former marketing executive and a psychiatrist.
He took her hand.
We complement each other. After Leo drifted off to sleep, they joined Matilda's rocking chair on the upper deck, the night sky ablaze with stars. The Milky Way arced above the ocean's dark horizon. A lighthouse beam swept across the water every 10 seconds. Aurora leaned against Orion, the steady hum of the world below lulling her into calm. She reflected on her journey, the betrayal by her own family, the cage of Greystone, the horrors of trafficking, and Matilda's ultimate sacrifice. Now, each milestone, Harper's empowerment, Sebastian's downfall, Vivian's life sentence, was a stone in the foundation of a new life she was building. Do you ever think about going back to Boston? Orion asked, breaking the silence as the lighthouse flash illuminated their silhouettes. Aurora shook her head. That chapter closed. This right here is home. Then let's make it ours, he said. He pulled her close. As the night breeze carried the sense of salt and fir, Aurora Finch allowed herself the rare privilege of unguarded hope. Tomorrow, she would stand before City Council for the legal clinic pitch, then lead a support group at the Courage Center. But for now, wrapped in Orion's arms under the chronic hush of redwood giants, she was simply a mother, a partner, and a survivor at peace. The next morning, Leo's laughter echoed as Aurora carried him down the stairs. She paused at the front window, gazing at the cove where her life's darkest battles had begun and now found their brightest dawns. She touched the glass, a silent vow forming on her lips, to protect, to heal, and to guide others toward their own new beginnings. With that, Aurora Finch stepped forward into her day, into a future reclaimed by justice, compassion, and unwavering love, knowing that at last, her story was hers to write. And that brings us to the end of today's story on TrueStory Vibes. Don't forget to leave a comment with a quote or moment that touched you the most. Your words give our team the motivation to keep creating more heartfelt stories. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.